She was 10 weeks pregnant when the billionaire CEO she had helped build from nothing had security escort her out of their $12 million mansion. In the rain, with one suitcase and $340 to her name. He had already frozen every bank account, already blocked her phone number, already planted fake photographs in a gossip blog to convince the world she was the villain. And his mistress, already wearing white at the charity gala, hand resting on a baby bump, that turned out to be completely fake. But here's what David Hamilton did not know when he threw his pregnant wife into the street. He did not know she had graduated top of her class from Columbia Law School. He did not know that the prenuptial agreement he used to steal everything from her contained a single clause that would destroy him. And he definitely did not know that the woman he dismissed as worthless was about to uncover a corporate fraud so massive that it would collapse his entire empire, land him in federal prison, and cost him every dollar he had ever earned. She did not have a rich father to save her. She did not have powerful connections. She had a retired professor with 3 cats, a kitchen table, and a napkin full of notes. This is not a fairy tale. This is a survival story. And it starts at the bottom. The lesson of this story is simple, but it will stay with you. You do not become powerful by having things. You become powerful by surviving when someone takes everything away. This story is for every woman who has ever been told she was worthless by someone who was afraid of her strength. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or if it gave you something you needed to hear today, leave a comment and tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you have not already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. We release new stories every week, and the next one might be the one that changes how you see everything. 3 days before the billionaire CEO kicked his pregnant wife out of their mansion to marry his mistress, Elena Dawson stood in a kitchen that cost more than most people's houses, arranging a tiny pair of yellow baby shoes next to a handwritten card that read, "Hello, Daddy." She had rehearsed this moment for 2 weeks. The eggs Benedict were perfect. The fresh squeezed orange juice sat in the crystal glasses they only used for anniversaries. She had even bought a onesie that said "Future CEO" because David would love that. He loved anything that reflected his own ambition back at him. And Elena had spent 7 years learning to be that mirror. David Hamilton came downstairs at exactly 7:15, already on his phone, already somewhere else. His 6'3" frame filled the kitchen doorway the way it filled every room he entered, with the unconscious authority of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. His dark hair was still damp from the shower, his jaw was freshly shaved. His gray eyes swept over the breakfast table without pausing on the baby shoes, without noticing the card, without seeing the woman who had woken up at 5:30 to create a moment he would never remember. He ate 3 bites of eggs Benedict, standing up. He drank half the orange juice while reading something on his phone that made him frown. He said, "Board meeting. Might be late." And then he was gone. The front door closed with the particular heaviness of a mansion door, the kind of sound that echoed through rooms designed to impress rather than comfort. Elena stood in the kitchen holding the baby shoes. She looked at the card she had written. She looked at the breakfast getting cold on plates that cost $200 each. And she felt something she had been feeling for months but had refused to name. The quiet certainty that she was performing a marriage for an audience of 1, and the audience had stopped watching. Here is something every relationship counselor will tell you for free. When someone stops noticing the effort you make, they have not just gotten busy, they have already left. The body is still there, but the person checked out months ago. Pay attention to what people ignore. It tells you more than what they say. Elena put the baby shoes back in her purse. She would tell David tonight instead. She would make his favorite dinner, the lamb chops with rosemary, and she would tell him about the pregnancy, and his face would light up the way it used to when she surprised him, back when surprises still mattered to him. She did not know there would be no tonight. She did not know that in 12 hours she would be standing in the rain with a single suitcase, watching the door of her own home close behind her for the last time. Elena spent the rest of the day preparing. She left the mansion at 10 to buy the lamb chops from the butcher David preferred, the one on Madison Avenue that charged $42 a pound. She stopped at the wine shop even though she could not drink anymore, because David would want the Barolo, the $200 bottle he saved for celebrations. She arranged candles in the dining room. She set the table with the wedding china they never used. By 6:30, everything was perfect. The lamb chops were resting. The candles were lit. Elena had changed into the green dress David always said he liked, though he had not mentioned it in over a year. She sat at the dining table and waited. At 6:47, she heard the front door open. She heard David's footsteps in the marble foyer. She heard other footsteps too, which was unusual, but David sometimes brought colleagues home without warning. Elena stood and smoothed her dress and walked toward the foyer with a smile that died the moment she turned the corner. David stood in the entryway with his coat still on. Behind him were two men Elena did not recognize, large men in dark jackets who carried the uncomfortable posture of people hired for unpleasant work. Beside David stood Kenneth Price, David's personal attorney, a thin man with thin lips who had always looked at Elena as though she were a line item on a balance sheet. Kenneth was holding a manila envelope. David did not sit down. He did not look at the candles flickering in the dining room behind Elena. He did not smell the lamb chops. He looked at his wife with the same expression he used in board meetings when terminating an underperforming executive, professional detachment dressed up as necessity. Elena, I need you to leave tonight. Kenneth has prepared separation documents. You can take personal belongings only. Everything else, the house, out, the cars, the accounts, those are corporate assets. Elena laughed. She actually laughed, the sound bouncing off the vaulted ceiling and the marble floors and the oil paintings she had chosen for those walls. She laughed because the alternative was to scream, and because some part of her brain could not process the words her husband had just said. David, what are you talking about? I have met someone who aligns better with where my life is going. This marriage has been a partnership, and that partnership has concluded. Partnership. Concluded. He was using the same language he used in press releases. Elena stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the hidden camera, waiting for anything that would explain why her husband of 7 years was standing in their foyer talking about their marriage like a quarterly earnings report. A partnership? Elena whispered. David, I am your wife. I am... She almost said it. Pregnant, the word rose in her throat like a reflex, but something stopped her. Some survival instinct she did not know she possessed told her to keep that card hidden. Not yet. Not like this. David handed her the manila envelope. Elena opened it with fingers that had started to tremble. Inside were photographs. Elena at a restaurant, laughing across a table from a man she vaguely recognized. Elena walking on a sidewalk beside the same man. Elena accepting a coffee cup from him outside an office building. The man was Tyler Brooks, a former classmate from Columbia Law School whom Elena had run into 3 weeks ago. They had shared a single lunch, catching up on mutual friends. It was innocent, meaningless, forgettable. but the photographs were time-stamped and annotated. Multiple dates, multiple locations, a pattern manufactured from coincidence. David had hired someone to follow her, to document a fiction, to create evidence of an affair that never happened. Elena looked up from the photographs and understood three things simultaneously. First, that David had been planning this for months. Second, that the prenuptial agreement she had signed, the one David had called just a formality, would be weaponized against her. And third, that the man she had loved for 10 years, the man she had helped build from nothing, had never intended for this marriage to last. She had been a phase in his business plan, and the phase was over. Kenneth Price cleared his throat. Mrs. Hamilton, the prenuptial agreement is quite clear. In the event of infidelity by either party, the offending spouse forfeits all claims to marital assets. Given the evidence of your extramarital relationship, Mr. Hamilton is prepared to proceed with an uncontested divorce. If you leave voluntarily tonight, he will not pursue the matter publicly. Elena grabbed the prenup from Kenneth's briefcase. She was a lawyer, or had been, before David convinced her that his career needed her full attention. She read the document with shaking hands and felt the floor tilt beneath her. It was airtight. Every clause, every provision, every carefully worded paragraph had been designed to leave her with nothing. Not even the $180,000 from her mother's life insurance that she had given David to start his company. He had made her sign it 1 week after her mother's funeral. 1 week after Elena had buried the only parent she had ever known. David had said it was a formality, had said his lawyers required it, had said it meant nothing. And Elena, drowning in grief, had signed without reading because she trusted the man she loved. Never sign legal documents during a period of grief, stress, or major life transition. It sounds obvious, but predators know exactly when you are vulnerable. They do not attack when you are strong. They wait for the funeral, the diagnosis, the heartbreak. Then they hand you a pen. Elena looked at David one last time. She searched his face for any trace of the man who had held her hand at her mother's funeral, who had promised to take care of her, who had whispered that she would never be alone again. She found nothing, just gray eyes and a jaw set with the impatience of a man who had already moved on. She took one suitcase. She packed it in 11 minutes while the 2 hired men stood in the hallway watching her. She did not pack the wedding china or the anniversary photographs or the green dress David had once loved. She packed jeans, sweaters, her laptop, and the baby shoes that were still in her purse. She walked out the front door into the rain. The door closed behind her with that heavy, final sound. And Elena Dawson stood on the steps of the mansion she had helped build, with $340 in her wallet, a baby growing inside her, and the absolute certainty that her life as she knew it was over. Elena drove to the Gramercy Park Hotel because it was the first place she thought of, the place where David had taken her on their first anniversary, back when he still planned surprises and she still believed in them. She handed her credit card to the front desk clerk with the practiced composure of a woman who had spent 7 years pretending everything was fine at dinner parties. The card was declined. She tried the joint savings account debit card. Also declined, she tried a third card, a personal one she kept for emergencies. Declined. David had moved faster than she had imagined possible. In the time it took Elena to pack a suitcase and drive to Midtown, her husband had frozen every account, canceled every card, and erased her financial existence with the efficiency of a man who had built his career on eliminating obstacles. Elena stood at the hotel front desk with her declined card spread on the marble counter and felt the first real wave of panic. Not the shock from the foyer, not the numbness from the photographs, but genuine animal fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize the safety net you trusted was never there. She called David. The number went straight to a recording. The number you are trying to reach is no longer accepting calls from this line. He had blocked her. She called Deborah Walsh, her closest friend, the woman who had been maid of honor at her wedding, the woman Elena had driven to the hospital when Deborah's daughter broke her arm. Deborah answered on the fourth ring. Elena, I think you should give David some space. He told us what happened with that other man. I cannot be in the middle of this. Elena's mouth opened and closed. Deborah, there was no other man. David manufactured those photos. He is lying. The silence on the line lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which Elena's best friend of 12 years chose between the woman she had known since college and the billionaire CEO who controlled the social world they both inhabited. Elena, I am sorry. I just cannot get involved. The line went dead. Elena sat in her car in the hotel parking lot. The rain hammered against the windshield like it was trying to get in. She had $340 in cash. She had no working credit cards. She had no friends willing to answer the phone. And she had a baby growing inside her that nobody in the world knew about except her. She tilted the seat back as far as it would go. She pulled her coat over herself like a blanket. And Elena Dawson, who had graduated from Columbia Law School with honors, who had helped her husband build a $2 billion technology company, who had decorated a 12,000 square foot mansion and hosted senators and celebrities and Fortune 500 executives, fell asleep in the back of a parking lot in the rain. In the morning, she woke up with her face pressed against the steering wheel, mascara smeared across her cheek, hair flattened on one side. She looked in the rearview mirror at the woman staring back at her and said out loud, Well, Elena, you went to Columbia Law School for this. She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that lives one breath away from crying, the kind that sounds exactly the same as sobbing if you are not paying close attention. Then she went into a gas station, bought a $2 coffee with cash, and started making a list on a napkin. Because that is what lawyers do when the world falls apart. They make lists. The list read, 1. Find somewhere to sleep. 2. Find a lawyer. 3. Protect the baby. 4. Survive. She added a fifth item after a moment. 5. Do not let him win. The cash lasted 4 days. Elena rationed it with the precision of someone who understood that every dollar was a day of survival. She bought gas station food because it was cheap. Protein bars, bags of peanuts, the occasional banana when a grocery store was nearby. She threw up every morning, sometimes in gas station bathrooms, sometimes on the side of the road, and she could not tell whether it was the pregnancy or the despair or both. On the third day, she went to a free clinic in the Bronx to confirm the pregnancy was progressing normally. The nurse, a tired woman in her 50s, named Gloria, asked the questions Elena had been dreading. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? Elena said yes. Gloria looked at Elena's wrinkled clothes, her unwashed hair, the dark circles under her eyes, and clearly did not believe her. Gloria handed Elena a business card without comment. It was for a women's shelter in the South Bronx. Elena stared at the card. She thought about her mother, Rosa Dawson, who had been a public school teacher and had raised Elena alone after Elena's father left when she was 3 years old. Rosa had worked double shifts, tutoring on weekends, to keep them in a decent apartment. Rosa had never asked for help, had never accepted charity, had never let Elena see her cry, even when the bills piled up and the refrigerator was empty. Rosa had died of cancer when Elena was 25, leaving behind $180,000 in life insurance. Elena had given every penny to David Hamilton to buy his first servers. The seed money that grew into a $2 billion empire. And now Elena was standing in a free clinic holding a business card for a homeless shelter. On the fourth evening, with $11 left in her wallet, Elena drove to the address on the card. The shelter was a converted warehouse with fluorescent lights, an industrial carpet, and the particular smell of a place where too many people shared too little space. The intake worker, a young woman with kind eyes and a clipboard, asked Elena her name. Elena started to say, Elena Hamilton, the name she had used for 7 years, the name on her frozen credit cards and her canceled cell phone plan, and the mansion she could no longer enter. Then she stopped. Elena Dawson, she said. Her maiden name, the name her mother had given her, the name that belonged to the woman she had been before David Hamilton, convinced her that his name was better. The intake worker assigned Elena to a shared room on the second floor. Her roommate was a woman named Jackie, 31 years old, with 2 young children and a fading bruise around her left eye that she did not bother to explain. Jackie was loud, profane, and completely unimpressed by Elena's situation. Girl, you had a penthouse? Jackie said, watching Elena unpack her single suitcase onto a metal bed frame. I had a studio apartment, and he still found things to throw at me. At least your man used lawyers instead of lamps. Elena almost smiled. Almost. There is a number every woman should know. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. And here is something people do not talk about enough. Abuse is not always physical. Financial abuse, isolation from friends, controlling legal documents, manufactured evidence. That is abuse, too. If someone is systematically dismantling your ability to survive without them, that is not a relationship. That is a hostage situation. 1 week after the billionaire CEO kicked his pregnant wife out of their mansion, Elena sat in the shelter's common room and watched the news that completed her humiliation. David Hamilton, CEO of Hamilton Technologies, photographed at a charity benefit with a woman identified as Tiffany Cole, 27, the company's vice president of marketing. The reporter described Tiffany as David's longtime companion and noted that Hamilton had recently separated amicably from his wife. But the real damage came from Christine Hamilton, David's younger sister, who ran the company's public relations division. Christine had planted a story on a Manhattan gossip site with the headline, Hamilton CEO's ex-wife caught in affair with former colleague. Is she the real villain? The story included the manufactured photographs and quotes from anonymous sources close to the family, describing Elena as unstable and increasingly erratic. Elena watched the story play out on the common room television while Jackie sat beside her eating microwave popcorn. Around them, other women in the shelter watched too, some with sympathy, some with the weary recognition of people who had seen this script before, with different names. Jackie looked at Elena's face and said, You gonna cry or you gonna fight? Elena said, I do not have anything to fight with. Jackie shrugged. Girl, you got a law degree and a grudge. That is more than most people start with. Elena had not thought about Professor Margaret Brennan in years. But Jackie's words stirred something in Elena's memory. A lecture hall at Columbia Law School. A woman in her late 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose and a flask she kept in her desk drawer that everyone pretended not to notice. Maggie Brennan had taught contracts law with the ferocity of a woman who believed the legal system was a weapon, and that her job was to teach students which end to hold. She was famous for a line she delivered on the first day of every semester. The law is not about justice. It is about leverage. Justice is what happens after you get the leverage. Elena had gotten a perfect score on Maggie's final exam, the only student in Maggie's 30-year career to achieve that distinction. Maggie had written on Elena's paper, "You have a dangerous mind. Use it." Elena had not used it. She had folded it up and tucked it away in a drawer marked David's wife, and spent 7 years forgetting she had ever been anything else. On a Tuesday morning, Elena took 2 buses from the Bronx to Queens and stood outside Maggie Brennan's apartment building, a 5-story walk-up in Astoria with a broken buzzer and a front door that did not lock properly. She climbed to the 4th floor and knocked. The door opened to reveal a small apartment that looked like a law library had exploded inside it. Books on every surface. Legal pads stacked on chairs. 3 cats of various sizes occupying strategic positions throughout the room, and Maggie Brennan, now 61, her hair gone completely silver, her reading glasses held together with tape, standing in the doorway in a Columbia Law sweatshirt and slippers. "Elena Dawson," Maggie said, squinting. "Perfect score, 2014. You look terrible. I need help, Professor Brennan." "It is Maggie. And come in. Step over jury. He bites strangers." Elena sat at Maggie's kitchen table, moving a stack of case files to make room, and told her everything. The 7-year marriage, the seed money from her mother's life insurance, the manufactured affair photographs, the prenuptial agreement signed 1 week after her mother's funeral, the frozen accounts, the shelter, the pregnancy. Maggie listened without interruption, which Elena remembered was her style. She asked no clarifying questions. She made no sympathetic noises. She poured herself coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since morning, and listened with the focused attention of a woman dissecting a legal problem. When Elena finished, Maggie picked up the prenuptial agreement and read it. She read it once quickly, then again slowly, making small marks in the margins with a pencil. Then she put it down, took off her glasses, and rubbed her eyes. "This prenup is a masterpiece of cruelty," Maggie said. "Whoever drafted this wanted you to have nothing, absolutely nothing. They anticipated every angle, every challenge, every possible claim you could make. It is the most thorough piece of legal destruction I have read in 40 years of practice." Elena's stomach dropped. "So there is nothing you can do." "I did not say that." Maggie put her glasses back on. "Here's the thing about masterpieces. They are built by humans, and humans make mistakes. I need 3 days and a lot of coffee." Elena asked how much Maggie charged. She had $11. "My hourly rate was $400 when I was practicing. For a student who got a perfect score on my final exam and is currently living in a shelter while pregnant, I will take payment in the form of watching that smug bastard's face when we nail him. That is worth more than money. Every contract has a weakness. Every legal document was written by a person who is tired, or rushed, or overconfident. If you ever sign something you regret, do not assume it is unbreakable. Find someone who reads the fine print for a living. It might cost you everything you have left, but knowing the truth about your own situation is worth more than comfortable ignorance." Maggie worked for 3 days. Elena came back each morning, riding 2 buses from the Bronx, bringing nothing because she had nothing to bring. She sat at the kitchen table and watched Maggie read, cross-reference, and mutter to herself while the 3 cats, judge, jury, and executioner, observed from various perches. On the 3rd evening, Maggie called Elena at the shelter. Her voice had changed. The academic detachment was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like excitement. "I found it," Maggie said. "The flaw. It is small, but it is real. The prenup was signed 1 week after your mother's funeral. You were demonstrably under emotional duress. More importantly, David's lawyer, Kenneth Price, was required by New York law to advise you to seek independent legal counsel before signing. There is no record that he did so, no signed waiver, no documentation of any kind. What does that mean? It means the prenup is potentially voidable, not automatically void, but challengeable. If we can demonstrate duress and lack of independent counsel, we can get a judge to throw it out. And once the prenup is gone, you are entitled to equitable division of all marital assets. For the first time in 10 days, Elena felt something besides despair. It was small and fragile and easily crushed, but it was there. Hope. She should not have trusted it. Maggie filed the motion on a Thursday morning, a challenge to the prenuptial agreement, citing emotional duress and failure to advise independent counsel, with a simultaneous request to freeze David's ability to finalize the divorce under the current terms. For 48 hours, Elena allowed herself to believe the system would work, that the law she had studied and loved would protect her, that David Hamilton, for all his money and all his lawyers, could not outrun the truth. She was wrong. David's response arrived like a missile with 3 warheads, each one designed to detonate a different part of Elena's life. The first, David's legal team filed a counter motion revealing that Elena's law license had lapsed 2 years ago. She had failed to complete her continuing education credits, a direct result of David discouraging her from maintaining her legal career. She could not represent herself, and Maggie, as a retired professor, without active courtroom standing in family law, could not represent her either. Their legal challenge was dead on arrival. The second, someone tipped off a reporter that Elena was living in a women's shelter. The story appeared online within hours, complete with photographs of Elena entering the building. The headline, "Billionaire's ex hits rock bottom, but is she playing the victim?" Christine Hamilton was quoted saying Elena was staging poverty for sympathy in the divorce proceedings. The third, and worst, David filed for emergency sole custody of the unborn child. His petition to the family court described Elena as living in unstable conditions unsuitable for raising a child, and exhibiting signs of mental instability consistent with a pattern of delusional behavior. He was using the shelter against her, using her poverty, the poverty he had manufactured, as evidence that she was an unfit mother. Elena read the custody petition in Maggie's kitchen at 11 o'clock at night. The document described her as delusional, financially irresponsible, and a danger to the well-being of her unborn child. Every word had been chosen to reduce her from a person to a diagnosis, from a mother to a risk factor. She put the document down on the kitchen table. Judge the cat walked across it, leaving a paw print on the section about mental instability. "He's going to take my baby," Elena said. Maggie was quiet for a long time. The apartment was still except for the sound of jury purring on the windowsill and the distant noise of a television in a neighboring apartment. "Not if we burn his house down first," Maggie said, "legally speaking." "Maggie, we do not have a match, let alone a fire." "Then we will make one." Maggie pulled a yellow legal pad from the stack on her kitchen counter and slapped it on the table, hard enough to startle executioner off the chair. "We cannot fight David Hamilton in court," Maggie said. "He has more lawyers than we have cats, and I have 3 cats. But every billionaire has enemies. We do not need to beat David. We need to find the people who already want to beat him and give them a reason." Elena stared at the legal pad. A month ago, she had been arranging candles for a pregnancy announcement dinner. Now she was planning corporate warfare. From a kitchen table in Queens, with a retired professor and 3 judgmental cats. "I am a lawyer," Elena said slowly. "Or I was. Or I." I know how to read filings. I know how to trace corporate structures. Now you are thinking, David Hamilton runs a public company. That means every financial filing, every proxy statement, every executive compensation disclosure is available if you know where to look. The information is not hidden. It is just buried in boring documents that nobody reads. Maggie pushed her ancient laptop across the table. Start reading. Elena began with Hamilton Technologies' public SEC filings. She read proxy statements, quarterly earnings reports, and footnotes that most investors skipped. She cross-referenced subsidiary financials with the parent company's consolidated reports. She worked 16 hours a day from Maggie's kitchen table, fueled by ginger ale because coffee made her nauseous, and by a growing sense that something in David's empire did not add up. On the fourth day, she found it. Hamilton Technologies had been reporting inflated revenue numbers for 3 consecutive quarters. The discrepancies were subtle, not the kind of obvious fraud that triggered automatic regulatory alerts, but rather a pattern of aggressive accounting that pushed revenue recognition forward from future quarters into current ones. Each individual adjustment was technically within the bounds of accounting flexibility. But taken together, they painted a picture of a company that was manufacturing growth to inflate its valuation ahead of a planned initial public offering. David Hamilton was cooking the books, and he was doing it to make himself richer at the expense of every shareholder who trusted his numbers. Elena could not prove it alone. She needed someone inside the company, someone with access to the internal financials that would confirm what the public filings suggested. She thought about every person she had met during 7 years as the CEO's wife, every executive, every board member, every uncomfortable handshake at a holiday party. She remembered James Whitfield, the longest-serving independent board member at Hamilton Technologies. A 55-year-old man with silver hair and a reputation for corporate ethics who had always seemed slightly out of place at David's lavish events. James never drank more than 1 glass of wine. He never laughed at David's jokes. He always left early. Elena called James from Maggie's landline. He agreed to meet at a diner in Brooklyn, a place where nobody from Manhattan's technology scene would ever go. He arrived in a baseball cap and a jacket without any logos, the disguise of a wealthy man trying not to be recognized. Over coffee and eggs, James confirmed everything Elena suspected. David had been manipulating financial statements, pressuring the accounting team to reclassify expenses, and using company funds for personal expenditures that were buried in the operational budget. The mansion renovation, the private jet upgrades, Tiffany Cole's salary, which had tripled in 18 months, despite no change in her responsibilities. James had been keeping a file for 2 years, emails, internal memos, financial discrepancies documented with the methodical precision of a man who knew he would need evidence someday. "Why did you not act?" Elena asked. "Because a board member, acting alone, looks like a grudge match. I needed someone with standing to file the complaint, someone whose story would make the SEC pay attention." He looked at Elena across the diner table. A wronged spouse with evidence of corporate fraud. That is not just a complaint. That is a headline, and headlines move markets. Elena walked back to Maggie's apartment with James's flash drive in her pocket and a feeling she had not experienced in weeks. Not hope exactly, something sharper, purpose. But 2 days later, at a routine checkup at the free clinic, the doctor found elevated blood pressure and protein in Elena's urine. Early signs of preeclampsia, the condition that turns pregnancy from a miracle into a medical emergency. You need to reduce stress immediately, the doctor said. Elena laughed. She could not help it. The sound came out too loud in the small examination room, and the doctor looked at her with the concerned expression of a medical professional assessing whether a patient is about to come apart. Reduce stress, Elena repeated. I will get right on that. Preeclampsia affects about 1 in 25 pregnancies in America. The symptoms can seem minor: high blood pressure, swelling, headaches, vision changes, but they can escalate fast. If you are pregnant and something feels wrong, do not wait. Do not Google it. Go to a doctor. Your body is smarter than your phone. The diagnosis changed the calculus. Elena was no longer fighting for money, for pride, for revenge. She was fighting on a timer. The stress of the battle against David Hamilton was literally threatening to kill her and her baby. Every sleepless night, every legal setback, every newspaper headline calling her crazy was raising her blood pressure to dangerous levels. She could stop fighting and save herself, or she could keep fighting and risk everything. It was not a difficult choice. David Hamilton had already taken everything from her. He was not going to take her child too. Elena worked through the pregnancy complications with the stubborn intensity of a woman who had decided that dying was not on her schedule. She took the blood pressure medication the clinic prescribed. She drank the water Maggie forced on her. She rested when her body demanded it, which was never often enough, and always at the worst possible time. The evidence against David was growing. Elena's legal training came back to her in pieces, then in waves, like a muscle that had atrophied from disuse but remembered its purpose. She could read a financial statement the way a mechanic reads an engine, finding the sounds that did not belong, the vibrations that indicated something broken underneath the surface. She discovered that David's relationship with Tiffany Cole had started not 18 months ago, as Elena had believed, but almost 3 years ago, before Elena gave up her law career. Tiffany had not been hired for her marketing skills. She had been hired as the next phase of David's plan. He promoted her to create the narrative that she was essential to the company while Elena was contributing nothing. The affair was not an accident. It was a strategy. Elena also found records showing that David had paid $40,000 to a private investigator named Frank Russo to manufacture the affair evidence against her. The lunch photographs had been staged. The timestamps had been manipulated. The entire case for Elena's supposed infidelity was a fiction written by a man who could afford to buy any story he wanted. But knowing the truth and proving the truth were different things. Elena needed Maggie to find a lawyer who could actually represent her in court. Maggie reached out to her network of former students and found Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old attorney at a small family law firm in Brooklyn who had a perfect record in custody cases and a personal hatred of wealthy men who used the legal system as a weapon. Sarah agreed to take the case at reduced rates, not free, but close enough that Elena's non-existent budget could survive. They were building something, slowly, painfully, but building. Then 3 catastrophic events hit in rapid succession, each one more devastating than the last. The first, Elena's car was repossessed. She had fallen behind on payments because every dollar was going to survival, and David's lawyers had contacted the leasing company to accelerate the process. The car was her last private space, the place she retreated to when the shelter was too loud or too crowded or too full of other people's pain. Now it was gone. The second, the family court issued a temporary order granting David what his lawyers called prenatal oversight rights, a legal maneuver that required Elena to submit to medical and psychological evaluations chosen by David's legal team. The evaluators would determine whether Elena was mentally fit to be a mother. The same man who had thrown her into the street was now hiring doctors to certify that she was crazy. The third, Elena got a call from Jackie at the shelter. Someone had broken into Elena's storage locker and stolen Maggie's laptop with all the evidence files. The financial analyses, the cross-referenced SEC filings, the preliminary draft of the fraud complaint. Elena had backed up most of the data on James Whitfield's flash drive, but the working files, the organized case she had been building for weeks, were gone. She stood on the sidewalk outside Maggie's apartment building, phoneless and carless, and felt the last structure of her resistance begin to crack. She had survived being kicked out. She had survived the shelter, the headlines, the custody threat. But this, losing her evidence, losing her transportation, losing her ability to even fight the evaluation order, this was the moment Elena Dawson came closest to giving up. She climbed the 4 flights to Maggie's apartment and sat on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. with her back against the refrigerator. The linoleum was cold and faintly sticky. Judge the cat sat on her lap uninvited, which was unusual because Judge normally bit anyone who sat on the floor. Perhaps he recognized a fellow creature at the bottom of its options. Maggie found her there 20 minutes later. The old professor did not ask what happened. She saw Elena's face and understood. She lowered herself to the kitchen floor with the careful movements of a 61-year-old woman whose knees did not approve of grand gestures, and sat beside her former student. They were quiet for a long time. "My second husband left me for his dental hygienist," Maggie said finally. "I spent 6 months eating nothing but cereal and watching Judge Judy. Then I got up and became the most feared contracts professor at Columbia Law School." She paused. "You know why?" "Why?" "Because cereal gets boring after 6 months." Elena laughed. It was small and broken and wet with tears, but it was a laugh. "We lost a battle," Maggie said. "We did not lose the war. Now get off my floor. My back cannot handle this." Elena's pivot came not from strength, but from exhaustion. She was too tired to fight David's way with money and lawyers and brute force, so she would fight her own way with information, patience, and the one advantage David never counted on. Elena knew how he thought. She rebuilt the case from Maggie's kitchen table using the backup data from James Whitfield's flash drive and publicly available records. Instead of relying on stolen corporate documents, she tracked David's personal spending through property records, vehicle registrations, and the social media accounts of everyone in his orbit. Tiffany Cole, it turned out, was an aggressive Instagram user. She posted photographs of every gift David gave her, every restaurant they visited, every luxury item she acquired, a $15,000 handbag, a weekend in Aspen, a diamond bracelet from a jeweler whose invoices Elena could cross-reference against Hamilton Technology's corporate expense accounts. Maggie watched Elena screenshot Tiffany's posts with the intensity of a forensic accountant. "In my day," Maggie said, "mistresses had the decency to be discreet. This woman is posting evidence of corporate embezzlement with a Valencia filter." Elena was deep in expense report analysis when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost did not answer. Unknown numbers had become a source of dread, usually process servers, or hostile journalists, or David's lawyers with another legal filing designed to crush her. She answered anyway. "Elena, it is Tiffany. Tiffany Cole, please do not hang up." Elena did not hang up. She pressed the phone harder against her ear and reached for a pen. Tiffany wanted to meet. Secretly, Elena's every instinct screamed trap. Maggie agreed. If it smells like a trap, looks like a trap, and calls you from a blocked number, it is a trap. But Elena went, because she was out of better options, and because something in Tiffany's voice, a crack in the polished confidence, sounded familiar. It sounded like Elena 3 weeks ago. They met at a coffee shop in Hoboken, across the river from Manhattan, far enough from David's world that the chances of being recognized were small. Tiffany arrived wearing sunglasses indoors and a scarf wrapped high on her neck. When she removed the sunglasses, her eyes were red-rimmed. When she unwrapped the scarf to take a sip of coffee, Elena saw the bruise on her wrist, finger-shaped and dark. Tiffany's hands shook as she set down the coffee cup. "He is doing to me what he did to you," Tiffany said, "and I am not even really pregnant." The pregnancy announcement, the tender belly touches at the charity event, the entire narrative of David's new family, it was all fabricated. David had instructed Tiffany to fake the pregnancy to create urgency for the divorce and public sympathy for his new relationship. Tiffany had agreed because David promised her the Chief Marketing Officer title after the IPO, a position that would make her career. But then Tiffany discovered the financial fraud herself. David had told her the IPO numbers were solid. She had built marketing campaigns, press materials, and investor presentations based on those numbers. If the SEC investigated, Tiffany would be criminally liable as an officer of the company, and David had structured everything: the email chains, the approval signatures, the internal memos, so that she, not he, would take the fall. "He set me up," Tiffany said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the same way he set you up. Different trap, same hunter." "I am not asking you to forgive me," Tiffany continued. "I knew he was married. I knew what I was doing, but I did not know about the fraud. I did not know about the fake pregnancy until he told me to stuff a pillow under my dress for a press photo. And I did not know he was planning to let me go to prison for crimes he committed." Sometimes the person who hurt you the most becomes the person who helps you the most. Not because they are sorry, but because the same monster is now eating them too. You do not have to trust someone completely to accept their help strategically. Just verify everything they give you. Elena verified. Over the following week, Tiffany provided internal emails, original financial reports, alongside the doctored versions David submitted to the SEC, and audio recordings she had made on her phone during meetings where David explicitly instructed staff to alter quarterly numbers. The case against David Hamilton was no longer a theory. It was a demolition plan. Elena, Maggie, and Sarah Mitchell compiled the evidence into a formal SEC complaint. They coordinated with James Whitfield, who confirmed that 3 other board members had been privately expressing concerns about David's management. The board was ready to act. They just needed a catalyst. Elena filed the complaint on a Tuesday. The SEC opened a formal investigation by Thursday. Hamilton Technologies stock dropped 12% on the news. Financial journalists began calling David's office. The board convened an emergency session. James Whitfield called Elena that Friday evening. His voice was warm, almost paternal. "It is working, Elena. David is panicking. The board is meeting Monday to vote on his removal. You did it." Elena hung up and allowed herself, for the first time since the night David kicked her out, to feel like she might survive this. She pictured a small apartment somewhere, a nursery with a window, her daughter growing up knowing her mother had fought back. She even smiled, sitting at Maggie's kitchen table, with Judge purring on her lap, and the setting sun throwing orange light through the dirty window. She should not have smiled. James Whitfield drove to David Hamilton's mansion on Saturday morning, 24 hours before the board vote that was supposed to end David's career. He brought everything: Elena's SEC strategy, Tiffany's cooperation agreement, the evidence files, the board member alliances, every detail of the plan that Elena had trusted him to protect. In exchange, David offered James the CEO position after the IPO, a $30 million retention bonus, and a guarantee that James would never face consequences for his role in the fraud. James was not an ally. He had never been an ally. He was an opportunist who had played both sides with the patience of a man accustomed to long investments, waiting to see which position offered the higher return. David's counterattack arrived Monday morning, not as a board vote removing him from power, but as a three-pronged assault that destroyed everything Elena had built. First, David fired Tiffany Cole at 9 a.m. in front of the entire executive team. His prepared statement described her as a rogue employee who manipulated financial records for personal gain. He released carefully edited versions of her recordings, cut and rearranged to make Tiffany sound like the mastermind of the accounting fraud. Within hours, Tiffany's name was trending as a cautionary tale about corporate greed, while David played the role of the CEO who had uncovered corruption in his own ranks. Second, David's lawyers filed a $50 million defamation lawsuit against Elena, claiming her SEC complaint had been maliciously fabricated to manipulate the company's stock price during contentious divorce proceedings. The lawsuit cited James Whitfield's testimony that Elena had pressured him to provide false evidence and had conspired with a terminated employee to commit securities fraud. Third, and most devastating, David's legal team presented the family court with James's testimony and the edited evidence, framing Elena not as a wronged wife seeking justice, but as a vengeful woman willing to commit federal crimes to win a divorce. They argued this proved she was morally unfit for custody of her unborn child and requested the court immediately grant David full parental rights. Elena learned about all three attacks in a single phone call from Sarah Mitchell, who delivered the news with the controlled voice of a lawyer who has learned that the worst information must be communicated calmly. Elena's blood pressure spiked within the hour. She was admitted to the hospital that evening with severe preeclampsia symptoms, her body finally rebelling against the relentless stress that had been building for weeks. The doctor told her that if the condition progressed, they might need to deliver the baby at 22 weeks. A baby born that early would face catastrophic health risks if it survived at all. Elena lay in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles and understanding for the first time that she might actually lose. Not just the divorce, not just the money, but her child, her life, everything. Maggie came to the hospital at 9 that night. She brought coffee for herself and ginger ale for Elena, and she sat in the plastic visitor's chair with the rigid posture of a woman who refused to look defeated even when defeat seemed certain. "I have been doing this for 40 years, Maggie said. I have seen a lot of bastards win, but I have never seen a bastard win forever. Maggie, I cannot do this anymore." "Yes, you can, because the alternative is letting him win, and you are too stubborn and too smart to let a man who cannot even cook his own breakfast win." He never did cook, not once in 7 years. A man who cannot feed himself has no business running a company. Remember that when you take his. Elena spent 2 weeks in the hospital. The preeclampsia stabilized with medication, bed rest, and what Maggie called weaponized calm, which meant Elena was forbidden from reading any news, checking any social media, or thinking about David Hamilton for more than 10 minutes per day. Maggie enforced this rule with the authoritarian efficiency of a woman who had managed classrooms full of future lawyers. While Elena rested, Maggie worked. There is a particular kind of brilliance that emerges from age and experience and having absolutely nothing left to prove. Maggie Brennan was 61 years old, lived alone with 3 cats, and had no career to protect, no reputation to maintain, and no patience for men who confused money with intelligence. She sat at her kitchen table every night and read every document, every filing, every footnote, every single word of the prenuptial agreement that David's lawyers had drafted to destroy Elena. And on the 9th night, she found it. The prenuptial agreement contained a morality clause, standard in high net worth divorces, that stated the entire agreement would be voided if either party engaged in fraud, material deception, or financial malfeasance during the marriage. David's lawyers had included this clause to protect David. They never imagined it could be turned against him. Why would they? David Hamilton controlled every aspect of his marriage, his company, his public image. The idea that his wife would ever uncover evidence of his fraud was laughable. She was, after all, just a wife, but David had committed fraud. He had manufactured evidence of Elena's infidelity. He had manipulated financial statements at Hamilton Technologies. He had orchestrated a fake pregnancy with Tiffany Cole. He had used company funds for personal expenses. Every single one of these acts constituted material deception or financial malfeasance during the marriage. The prenup did not just become voidable. Under its own terms, it self-destructed. And when it self-destructed, Elena was entitled not to nothing, not to a settlement negotiated from weakness, but to a full, equitable division of all marital assets, including David's shares in Hamilton Technologies. Maggie called Elena at the hospital. Her voice had the careful control of someone trying very hard not to shout with excitement in a small apartment at midnight. Elena, I found the match and the gasoline, and the fire department will not be able to save him. Elena did not rush. She had learned that lesson at a cost she would carry for the rest of her life. James Whitfield's betrayal had taught her that allies could become enemies, that hope could become a weapon used against you, and that the only person she could trust completely was herself. She spent 4 weeks recovering, stabilizing her health, and quietly rebuilding her case from Maggie's apartment. She contacted Tiffany again. Tiffany, now unemployed, publicly humiliated, and facing David's legal threats, had nothing left to lose and everything to gain from Elena's success. She provided new evidence she had held back the first time, including a recording of David explicitly instructing her to fake the pregnancy and a text message thread in which David discussed getting rid of Elena permanently through the custody battle. Elena also contacted the SEC directly, bypassing the board entirely. She provided the original unedited evidence alongside proof of James Whitfield's betrayal. The SEC investigator assigned to the case, Catherine Reeves, listened to Elena's presentation for 2 hours without interruption. Ms. Dawson, Catherine said when Elena finished, I have seen a lot of corporate fraud. This is the first time I have seen a CEO commit fraud against his own wife and his own shareholders simultaneously. That takes a special kind of arrogance. Maggie, watching Elena work at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads and evidence files, observed, You know, when I invited you to use my apartment, I did not realize I was opening a law firm. Judge just threw up on your motion for discovery, by the way. Which judge? Elena asked without looking up. The cat. Elena filed 3 simultaneous legal actions on a Friday afternoon at 4:45, 15 minutes before courts closed for the weekend. This was deliberate. David's legal team would not see the filings until Monday morning, giving Elena 48 hours of silence before the storm. The first filing, a motion to void the prenuptial agreement and, under the morality clause, supported by evidence of David's fraud, the manufactured affair photographs, and the fake pregnancy scheme. The second filing, a revised SEC complaint with Tiffany's unedited recordings, original financial documents, and evidence of James Whitfield's complicity in the cover-up. The third filing, a countersuit for custody, including David's own text messages about getting rid of Elena, evidence that the original custody petition was based on manufactured circumstances, and medical records showing Elena's preeclampsia had been directly exacerbated by David's legal harassment. Timing is not just about clocks. It is about psychology. When you are fighting someone with more resources, you do not announce your moves in advance. You file at 4:45 on a Friday. You serve papers at 7 in the morning on a Monday. You create chaos in their schedule while maintaining control of yours. Every lawyer knows this. David Hamilton learned about the filings at 7:12 on Monday morning when Kenneth Price called him in a panic. By 9 a.m., the SEC had issued a formal subpoena for Hamilton Technologies' internal financial records. By noon, the company's stock had dropped another 19%. By 3 p.m., 4 board members had publicly called for David's resignation. The Metropolitan Club annual charity gala was held that Thursday evening, as scheduled. David Hamilton was still technically the host, though his name had been removed from the event program by the club's board of directors, who preferred not to associate their institution with an ongoing SEC investigation. Elena arrived in a $40 black maternity dress from a consignment shop in Brooklyn. She was 32 weeks pregnant now, visibly and unmistakably carrying the child that David had tried to take from her through the courts. She wore no jewelry. Her hair was pulled back simply. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had been through something terrible and was still standing. Maggie had insisted on buying the $500 ticket. "Consider it an investment in entertainment," Maggie said. "I have not been to a party in 12 years. The cats will survive one evening without me." Elena did not make speeches. She did not confront David across the ballroom. She did not call board members from the center of the dance floor. She simply walked through the room, said hello to people she knew, and let them see her. Pregnant, calm, present, alive. The woman David had told everyone was crazy, desperate, dangerous, unstable, delusional. Standing right there, sipping sparkling water, asking people about their children. Christine Hamilton approached with her public relations smile firmly in place. "Elena, I am surprised to see you here. I hope you are taking care of yourself." "I am." "Thank you, Christine. How is the PR department handling the SEC investigation?" Christine's smile did not change, but something behind her eyes went very still. She excused herself and walked directly to David, who stood near the bar with the hunted expression of a man who has just realized he is surrounded. David saw Elena across the room. He did not approach. For the first time in their entire relationship, David Hamilton was afraid of his wife. The board meeting the following Monday was brief and decisive. Sarah Mitchell presented the evidence, the unedited recordings of David instructing employees to alter financial documents, Tiffany's testimony about the fake pregnancy, the manufactured affair photographs traced back to the private investigator David had hired, James Whitfield's deal with David, documented through emails James had been foolish enough to send from his corporate account. The vote was unanimous. David Hamilton was removed as CEO of Hamilton Technologies. James Whitfield was removed from the board. Both were referred to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. David called Elena from the hallway outside the boardroom. She answered. "You destroyed everything," David said. Elena was quiet for a moment. She could hear the echo of the hallway, the distant sound of elevators, The muffled voices of board members discussing a company that no longer had a leader. No, David, you destroyed everything. I just made sure people found out. Family Court. Judge Barbara Thornton's courtroom on the ninth floor of the Manhattan Family Court building. A room with fluorescent lighting and scuffed wooden benches and the particular atmosphere of a place where families are officially taken apart. Elena sat at the plaintiff's table with Sarah Mitchell. David sat across the aisle with Kenneth Price and two other attorneys from a firm that charged $1,200 an hour. The imbalance was visible, intentional, and ultimately irrelevant. Judge Thornton had read everything. The manufactured affair evidence, the fake pregnancy, the weaponized custody petition, David's texts about getting rid of Elena, the medical records showing Elena's preeclampsia was exacerbated by David's legal harassment. Every document, every filing, every piece of evidence that Elena and Maggie and Sarah had compiled from a kitchen table in Queens. Judge Thornton was 62 years old, had served on the family court bench for 30 years, and was known throughout the New York legal community for her zero tolerance for parents who used children as weapons. She read her decision from the bench in a voice that carried the weight of 3 decades of watching people at their worst. In 30 years on this bench, I have seen parents try to destroy each other using this court system. I have seen cruelty disguised as concern. I have seen wealth deployed as a substitute for character. But I have rarely seen it done with this level of calculated malice. She looked directly at David Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton, you did not just lie to this court. You manufactured evidence of infidelity against your wife. You orchestrated a fraudulent pregnancy to create public sympathy. You weaponized your wife's poverty you deliberately created as evidence of her unfitness as a mother. And you attempted to use your unborn child as leverage in a divorce proceeding. The courtroom was silent. Kenneth Price was writing furiously on a legal pad. David's face had gone the particular shade of gray that accompanies the realization that money cannot fix everything. I am granting full custody to Mrs. Dawson. I am ordering a comprehensive review of Mr. Hamilton's fitness for any parental rights, and I am referring the manufactured evidence, in this case, to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. If you are in a custody battle and the other parent is using your circumstances against you, circumstances they created, document everything. Every text, every email, every financial transaction. Courts are not perfect, but judges can tell the difference between a parent in crisis and a parent who manufactured a crisis. Your evidence is your voice when you cannot be in the room. The divorce settlement followed 3 weeks later. The prenuptial agreement was voided under the morality clause. The equitable division of marital assets, calculated by forensic accountants who charged considerably less than $1,200 an hour, awarded Elena approximately $8 million. This included the family home, which she planned to sell, a portion of David's personal Hamilton Technologies shares, compensatory damages for the manufactured evidence and emotional distress, and full reimbursement of her legal fees. $8 million. Not $50 billion from a fictional dead father, not a corporate takeover orchestrated by someone else. $8 million earned through every sleepless night in a gas station parking lot, every humiliating headline, every morning throwing up in a shelter bathroom, every hour spent reading financial filings at a kitchen table, while 3 cats judged her silently. Maggie read the settlement terms and said, $8 million. Not bad for a woman who was eating gas station hot dogs 2 months ago. They were not hot dogs, they were taquitos. Even worse, I am billing you for emotional damages. David Hamilton pled guilty to 2 counts of securities fraud 4 months later. He received 18 months in federal prison and $4.2 million in fines. His net worth, once estimated at $2.1 billion, collapsed to approximately $6 million in liquid assets after the stock crash, legal fees, and regulatory penalties. Christine Hamilton took a public relations job in Chicago and never spoke to the press again. James Whitfield was barred from serving on any public company board for 10 years. Tiffany Cole cooperated with federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity. She moved to Austin, Texas, and started a small marketing consulting firm. She and Elena were not friends. They would probably never be friends. But Tiffany sent flowers when Elena's daughter was born, with a card that read, "She is lucky to have a fighter for a mother." Here is something that nobody tells you about survival. It does not look like the movies. There is no moment where the music swells and you stand triumphant on a hilltop while your enemies weep below you. Survival looks like Tuesday. It looks like doing laundry. It looks like opening a textbook after putting a baby to bed. It looks like the ordinary, unremarkable continuation of a life that someone tried to end. 6 months after the settlement, Elena Dawson lived in a 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy, a pre-war building with creaky floors and radiators that clanked at night and good light in the mornings. 1 room for Elena, 1 room for the baby, 1 room converted into a home office with a desk, a laptop, and law books stacked on every available surface. Her daughter's name was Rosa, named for the grandmother, who would never hold her, the public school teacher who had worked double shifts to keep food on the table and had died of cancer without knowing that her life insurance money would build a billionaire's empire. Rosa Dawson had given everything she had so her daughter could have a better life. Elena intended to make sure that sacrifice was not wasted. Elena was studying for the bar exam. She had let her law license lapse during her marriage, had let David convince her that his career was more important, that her skills were better used supporting his ambitions than building her own. That was finished now. She studied every night after Rosa fell asleep, reading case law and contract theory by the light of a desk lamp while her daughter breathed softly in the next room. Maggie was helping her prep, which mostly consisted of Maggie calling at random hours to quiz Elena on contract law, while 1 or more cats made noise in the background. Their study sessions were loud, argumentative, and punctuated by Maggie's observations about the general inadequacy of the modern legal profession. On a Thursday evening in October, Elena sat on the floor of her apartment with Rosa sleeping in her arms. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator and the faint sound of traffic on the street below. There were law books on the coffee table and baby toys on the floor and a framed photograph of her mother on the bookshelf. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maggie. "Stop staring at that baby and study. Contracts exam is in 3 weeks. Also, Judge threw up on your textbook again. I am not buying you another one," Elena typed back. "Tell Judge I will bill him for damages." She looked down at Rosa. The baby's face was peaceful in sleep, unaware of the war that had been fought over her existence, the courtrooms and legal filings, and hospital beds and shelter cots that had marked her journey into the world. Rosa would grow up knowing none of it. She would grow up knowing only that her mother loved her, that her grandmother's name was worth carrying, and that the apartment with the creaky floors and the good morning light was home. Elena thought about the mansion on the Upper East Side, the 12,000 square feet of imported marble and designer furniture, and the particular emptiness of rooms built to impress rather than comfort. She thought about the baby shoes she had set on the breakfast table, the ones David never noticed. She thought about the woman she had been that morning, arranging candles and rehearsing announcements for a man who had already decided to destroy her. That woman was gone, not destroyed, transformed. stripped down to the essential elements by a process that felt like demolition, but was actually renovation. Elena Dawson had discovered that the woman underneath the marriage, underneath the mansion, underneath the 7 years of performing someone else's idea of her value, was stronger than anyone had imagined. Stronger than David had imagined. Stronger than Elena herself had imagined. You do not become powerful by having things. You become powerful by surviving when someone takes everything away, not by inheriting a fortune or by having a secret benefactor or by some magical intervention that transforms your circumstances overnight, but by the slow, unglamorous, deeply ordinary act of refusing to quit, by making lists on napkins at gas stations, by reading legal filings at kitchen tables, by showing up at courthouses and consignment store dresses, by choosing every single day to fight for one more day. Elena put Rosa in her crib. She straightened the blanket. She touched her daughter's cheek with one finger and felt the warmth of a life she had almost lost. Then she walked to her desk, opened her textbook to the chapter on contract remedies, and started studying. Because the bar exam was in 3 weeks, and Elena Dawson had never gotten less than a perfect score on anything Margaret Brennan had prepared her for. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its usual indifference. Millions of lives colliding and separating and continuing in the way that cities do. Somewhere in a federal facility in New Jersey, David Hamilton was learning that the meals were served on plastic trays and that nobody cared about his stock portfolio. Somewhere in Queens, Maggie Brennan was reading case law and drinking coffee and telling Judge the Cat to get off the kitchen counter. Somewhere in Austin, Texas, Tiffany Cole was building a business that did not depend on a man's approval for its survival. And in a 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, a woman who had been kicked out of a mansion with nothing was studying to become a lawyer again. Not because she needed the money, because she had remembered who she was before someone told her she was worthless. The law is not about justice, Maggie always said. It is about leverage. Justice is what happens after you get the leverage. Elena Dawson had gotten the leverage. And justice, imperfect and incomplete, and nothing like the movies, had arrived not with a dramatic confrontation in a ballroom, but with a baby sleeping in the next room and a textbook open on a desk and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to her, and she was just getting started. The content of this story was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful entertainment with real value. Every detail, from the legal strategies to the medical information, was crafted to ensure that this story does more than just entertain. It educates, inspires, and reminds you that the most powerful weapon a woman can carry is the refusal to give up.